time. I love Paris in the fall.
And joining us now, we're going to find out about really one of the top publications for a very long time, the Paris Review, a brand new book out called The Unprofessionals, the new American writing from the Paris Review. It's a great pleasure to have the editor of that publication joining us today from New York, Lorin Stein, on the telephone. And Lorin, good to talk with you. How are you today?
Good to be here. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing great. I've always heard about the Paris Review. I guess I first heard about it when George Plimpton used to talk about it. He was one of the first editors of that publication, right?
He was our first editor. He was our editor for 50 years, and I'm only the third person in the job, in fact.
A good track record. Only have 3 in 50 years. You should be there a while now.
It's pretty, the benefits are good.
Well, talk a little bit about it, because I think people maybe aren't that familiar with what exactly it is. They probably heard of it. They probably see it on the newsstands and that. But it really is more of a collection of writing, literature, poetry, and then some nonfiction as well, right?
That's right. That's right. The Paris Review was started by a handful of American expatriates in Paris in 1953, and it moved a few years later to New York, where it's been ever since. And it was always published in English, and it's been the Americans, and its main mission has always been to discover new writers. And Philip Roth, David Foster Wallace, Adrienne Rich, Jack Kerouac, these are all writers who got their start in the Paris Review. And it's America's probably most famous literary magazine, but it's also by a long shot the most popular literary magazine we have. It's got a very large readership for a little magazine, and actually it's much more popular now than it ever was in the 50s or 60s or ever in the history of the magazine. We have our print readership has doubled almost in the last 5 years. So,
oh, that's great. Yeah,
to our shock.
I was going to say, because magazines and publications are going through a big change with online and all that, so that's good to hear.
It was very surprising to us, but I think I know why it is, and that's why we're putting this book out. It's because this has been a very lucky time to be in a literary magazine, which, as you say, is devoted to fiction and poetry and the occasional essay, because there has been an explosion of talent and purpose, I would say, in the last 5 years among younger American writers. And this is a collection of our favorite younger writers from the magazine from these last 5 years.
I guess if you're a writer, and this gives you an opportunity to write longer form pieces, because the newspaper occasionally has something like this, but not to this extent, poetry and fiction type of writing, so there are not too many outlets for it, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, certainly not in the paper, but also not, and maybe more crucially, not online. And and the writing that we publish really is not written for we have a blog, we have a very popular blog, but the writing that we publish in the Quarterly is really written for the page and written for a reader who wants to leave the distractions of the internet and social media, especially, behind for a few minutes.
What now? You're the editor. You get a lot of submissions. What makes a piece eligible? If that's the right word for the Paris Review. What do you look for?
It depends on the piece, but I'd say that I've noticed that a lot of the fiction that speaks to me especially has kind of three things in common. There's a voice, a narrator, whose existence I completely believe in, and that narrator is trying to tell a story that I will believe is true. It's trying to convince me of the truth of the story. And the third thing is a kind of wisdom that the narrator is trying to settle a troubled conscience, or is really morally engaged in what he or she is talking about, and doesn't know what's right or wrong, but is trying to work it through. Not every story, that doesn't describe everything we publish in the review, but I tend to gravitate toward it, and toward stories of intimacy and shame, or stuff that's hard to talk about in nonfiction, but that we can talk about in poetry or in stories.
And obviously in any kind of publication there's a limit of words, but pretty much it's open-ended, right? I mean, it can be 10 or 20 pages.
You don't have a word limit. But we sometimes publish a whole novel. We'll just serialize it over several issues. We can publish pretty much what we want.
Do the writers have to have previous publishing, or do you accept from the amateur in Ohio somewhere? I mean, is it everybody?
We love it. That's our job. It's largely. I mean, yes, we publish a lot of famous writers, but there's a special excitement when you find someone who no one's read before. And one reason that we get a lot of submissions is because editors and agents read the Paris Review. They treat it as a kind of farm team. Mm-hmm. So it's a place where you go to see what's new, what's original, and what's really happening in American literature.
How many publications or submissions, I should say, do you get in a given month that come across your desk? How much do you have to whittle down to get an issue every month?
Well, if you add what the interns see to what I see, I forget, but I think it's like maybe 1,000 a month, something like that. But not quite that many cross my own desk, but a fair number. It's a lot. It's a very, very tiny percentage that we're able to publish.
Yeah, and you can really get the cream of the crop. And in this particular book called The Unprofessionals, does that mean all of these were pretty much amateur writers or not getting paid full-time to do this, that are in this particular book?
That is a very fair assumption, but it's not exactly the intent. No, these writers, some of them have become, in the last 5 years, and some even before that, they've become famous, well-known. They're all younger writers, and the reason we called it The Unprofessionals is because the kind of writing they're doing is not the kind of personal/professional writing that we're all more and more called on to do every day in social media or online. These are writers who are writing literature as literature, writing for writing's sake. And there's been a tremendous pressure building on especially younger writers in the last 10 years to turn into self-marketers. And these writers are not, they may do that in their private lives, or I should say their public lives, but that's not what's happening in the work that they send to us. It's free and inward-turning and completely concerned with the task at hand, not with likability, not with marketability.
And we mentioned it's fiction, nonfiction, also poetry. Is poetry kind of making a comeback? It seemed like, maybe 50, 100 years ago that was more prevalent. How about today?
There's always a story about poetry dying, and then there's also a story always about poetry coming back. And I don't really know. It's certainly not a popular form the way it was 100 or 150 years ago, but I think there's a lot of good thinking going on and beautiful work being done in verse. And the poems that we publish, we have a slightly odd attitude toward poetry at the Paris Review because we pay attention to a lot of journals that are pretty esoteric. We like poems that are very smart and very sophisticated, but that also you could tear out and put up on the refrigerator door. We call it the refrigerator door test. Not every poem that we publish passes the refrigerator door test. It's not the most important thing, but we love it especially when there's a poem that we publish that someone would want to send to her mom or his wife or whoever it is. The kind of poem that you say, not as a professional reader, but just as a common reader, you say, wow, that's something.
You're not publishing limericks. These are high-class poems.
We're not yet publishing limericks, but I like the thought.
Well, it really is a great book, and again, this is called The Unprofessionals. It's apart from the monthly publication, which people, I guess, can order that online, right? The Paris Review, right?
Absolutely. Go to theparisreview.org. You can get both. You can get the book and a subscription.
Great. The Paris Review, The Unprofessionals. We've been talking with the editor, Lorin Stein, today. And Lorin, appreciate you taking the time. I know you got a lot on your plate with all those things you have to read every month, but hopefully we can talk to you again. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles Media.